Well, thanks for joining us tonight, everyone. My name is Linda Lukasic. I'm the Executive Director at Environment Hamilton, and really pleased to have you all here at this session tonight. Want to thank you for taking time out of a nice July evening to join us. And I would note it's a very hot and humid July evening. I know that it's still 33 degrees out there with the humidex, and we've got more hot weather coming this week. I think tomorrow with humidex, we're going to see a whopping 37 degrees Celsius. So the heat is certainly on, and it's something that we need to be concerned about. But before we go any further, I want to hand things over to Matt Thompson, who is co-hosting tonight with me. Matt, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself and to share the land acknowledgement.
Hi everyone, my name is Matt Thompson from the Social Planning and Research Council, and I would just like to share this land acknowledgement. Since we are unable to gather in person, I would like to acknowledge the land that I am situated on here today in Hamilton is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples. The territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is directly adjacent to the Haldimand Tract, 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. That was returned to the Six Nations of the Grand River by the Haldimand Treaty of 1784. The larger territory of Southern Ontario is the subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas that bound them to peacefully share the territory and protect the land. The single spoon reflects the need to share and to ensure the bowl is never empty. This refers to taking care of the land and the creatures that we share it with. There are no knives, indicating the need to protect and share in peace. Subsequent Indigenous nations and other peoples were invited into this covenant in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I am grateful for the opportunity to gather on this territory, even virtually, and to work in this community. Through this land acknowledgement, my intent is to honor and show gratitude to the original stewards of the land as a sign of respect and willingness to learn and heal. As we reflect on the tragic news regarding the discovery of more mass graves at residential schools, let these tragedies serve as a reminder that we must be committed to the truth and reconciliation, including implementing all recommendations of the TRC in our communities. Together, may we care for this land, for each other, being mindful of generations to come. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you for that, Matt. So the heat is really on, and it's a serious challenge that we need to acknowledge, understand, and work together to address. So we're really pleased to bring you this webinar series, and I just want to recognize that this is a joint effort between Environment Hamilton, the Social Planning and Research Council, the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction, and Acorn Hamilton. And it's a subcommittee of us, myself, Matt, Tom Cooper, and Olivia O'Connor, who have worked to organize the event. But I want to acknowledge that we're part of the larger Just Recovery Hamilton coalition, which included releasing a document with a list of really important recommendations. And we hope that you've all had a chance to see that report. If not, no worries, we'll send you a link in a follow-up email after this event. But I just want to acknowledge that many of the recommendations in that report apply to the focus of tonight's conversation around climate change, extreme heat, and the serious impacts on community members. It's been front page news in many parts of North America right now. I'm sure you've all seen coverage of the heat dome, wildfires, record-breaking heat in many parts of the globe. And the reality of the climate crisis-induced extreme heat is all around us. And we need to acknowledge that we're not ready for it. And we need to have some serious community conversations about the nature of the challenge and how we can all come together and take action to address the challenges in our neighborhood or in our community. I just want to say too that we're going to have an open Q&A session after all of the speakers have shared information with us tonight. But just want to say that if you do have any questions that you really want to make sure that you get out there, feel free to use the chat. We've got, I think Tom Cooper is monitoring the chat for us tonight. We'll make sure that we keep up to speed with any questions we see there, but know that at the end you'll have a chance to ask more questions. And Matt, I think, are you going to start with introducing Dr. Arain? Oh, and you're muted, Matt. Just
Yeah, let me just quickly introduce Dr. Altaf Arain is the director for the Center for Climate Change at McMaster University. He will be speaking on global warming's impact in the Hamilton area.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Linda, for invitation. So it's an honor for me to present in this forum today. It's very, very good.
Test.
Yes. So can you hear all right?
Test.
Okay. So this is the title of my talk today. Is just the same title that we have in the agenda, Global Warming Impacts in Hamilton. And we'll start with the bigger picture. So let's see what happens at the bigger picture. So atmospheric CO2 concentration. So we have seen this increase in atmospheric CO2 concentration in all greenhouse gases, CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide. That they're increasing at a very rapid rate. This kind of increase we haven't seen in the last 800 years. That's in the blue graph there. And then we see this very large jump there that is occurring right now. So that's a very, very, very rapid increase of CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. Our current level of CO2 is about 420, and we are increasing at 2 ppm per year that we have. So as a result, we have the warming that is occurring in temperature. So we see this increase in temperature very rapid in recent 3 decades. And here we can see that every decade is like a steps going up. So every decade we see the increase in the temperature. These are the decadal average temperatures. And then we also see under the scenario for the projections for the future, we are right now we are following the high RCP 8.5 scenario, the red line we are following right now. And then we expect more warming to come in the future. So this is prediction from IPCC. And then at the global scale, these are the global scale temperatures. So, but it's not just the temperature. If you look at these records, now these are multiple indicators, not just the temperature. So the first graph here, we see a land temperature from 4 data sets. We see the sea surface temperature from 5 data sets. The marine air temperature, we see this increase there. The sea level rise, we have it. And then the summer Arctic Sea, a decline in the Arctic Sea. And then we see this humidity increasing and also the glacier mass declining. So these are multiple indicators. They're pointing to one direction, that we are warming, and we are warming very rapidly. As a result, we have many consequences. The most important consequence is the acceleration of the hydrologic cycle, where we can see the bigger events, more evaporation happening. It will contribute to the atmospheric warming, but at the same time, we may have more rain and extreme flooding, and in between we may have the droughts as well. So that's what the projections are there. We see the indication of accelerated hydrologic cycle already. So what is really happening in Hamilton area? So I'll show you some slides. This is Hamilton specific data that we have analyzed for this particular event here. Then we see this Hamilton, and these are observed data sets from Environment Canada and projected climate data from the 12 models. These are the models, they were part of the IPCC. These are downscaled at 10 kilometer resolution, and they are over the Hamilton. So we can see the decadal, these are decadal maximum temperatures. So we see the increase going on as we go from the past up to 2013. So we see this warming, and also the minimum temperature has increased, more red towards the 2000 and 2013 decade there, a little bit bigger. But we see this warming trend, and I want to thank Tariq Dean. He's my PhD student for conducting this analysis. And so this is warming in Hamilton. So this is an average of all the grids that are located over the Hamilton. And then we see this decadal kind of change, the steps that are going there. The baseline anomaly for the baseline is 1960 to 1990 period. So we see this increase happening as we go towards the future in the temperature. And then we are mostly right now following this red line there. In terms of the summer days, we see the same story. So these are the summer days. These are the number of days that we see. They are also increasing, and these are the days more than 25 degrees C. And here in the table, there are percentage change in the summer days relative to the previous decade. So there's 3%, 9%, 6%, 10%, up to 2040. You add this percentage, basically you're looking like 30% change there. And also the same for the tropical nights. When the temperature is above the 20 degrees C, we see 26, 24% kind of changes as per decade as we go forward. And this here is these graphs are for the warmest spell duration. These are like a heat wave kind of indicator. This is T max, maximum temperature about 19th percentile for 5-day running mean of as compared to the baseline period. So this is like you can say this is like a heat waves. So we see the increase. These are the number of days. We can see the steady increase from only a few events per year. We are going up to 10, 13, 14, 15 events kind of there. So we can see this change, percentage change at the bottom here. 25%, 20% kind of change. And the same is, this is like a 90th percentile annual days. We see the same, this is like a percentage change in there. In terms of the precipitation, this the two first graph, the gray graph is our monthly mean temperature over this period, 30-year period. So we have an evenly distributed precipitation. And this is model simulation, but you see this change there. We will have a quite significant seasonal changes. Earlier, we will have a stronger events, and then we will have a more drought events later on in the summer. And then we see more in 8.5 scenario. So this would be changes in hydrologic cycle in our area. And we already see, you can see just the color, more whitish there to more bluish there. So it's an increase in precipitation. In terms of the precipitation, that is more than 20 millimeters per day. So these are the bigger events. And then we see the steady increase happening over the time in our region. But you can also look at the variability in the projected model. These are from the 12 models, so variability is large. Some models even predict more there. And the same is happening for the 99th percentile. These are very, very big events that may happen. We see the same increase for those kind of events going forward. So this is this graph shows us the annual maximum 5-day consecutive precipitation, the wet spell where the rain is happening for 5 consecutive days. So we will see some increase in these kind of events as well. But these kind of events are hard to predict as well in the model, but we will see some kind of increasing trend in there as well. So this is very specific information that we will have in our region going forward. But we also did this whole Canada analysis, or all Canada 10-kilometer grid cells. So this was paper published very recently, 2019. And in this paper, this is a lot of graphs. These are a lot of indices. Here we have a precipitation. On the other side, we have a temperature. But you will just look at one in our region, the Great Lakes region. The greenish and the purple is more change happening. So that's the message these graphs are giving. In different drought and the wet spell and the warm temperature, the change is more in Quebec and Ontario, this corridor. So that's what the message shows as compared to the rest of the Canada. And some change in the West Coast, but this is the area we'll see the more change. And this was another paper that we analyzed. This was my PhD student as well. We looked at the hydrometeorological events where the large scale atmospheric circulation may impact and create these extreme events. So this was the February flood in 2018, where there's a high pressure in our area that stayed for a longer period of the time, and we got this heavy melt and the flooding happening. So this kind of circulation changes will bring in this kind of event. So that this was the analysis that was pointing towards out. So this happened in our area some time ago. But if you look at the Western heat wave, the same kind of high pressure was hovering in this area for a long period of the time, and it created the heat wave. So this, and in our area, this created the flooding. Over there is a heat wave. So, but there, this you can see the record break. Important thing was the change, but the margin, the records were broken. So that's kind of event we can see. And they have health impacts. Others will be talking in this forum on the health impacts, and these are the studies in Ontario, the temperature change health impacts, many studies. But going forward, the discussion and the debate right now is if we have this multiple climate-related extreme events that either occur simultaneously or they occur every year or sequentially. Are we cross some thresholds like 2 degree versus 1.5 degree? What would be the impact? That's like a big if or the big debate right now going on. And basically, the heat event that we saw in the June is a compound event there. So there's a heat wave there, but there is also a long-term worse kind of drought in the Western US. And so they both are event happening at the same time. So this is a good example that we see this year. This is my research at Turkey Point Observatory. We have a long record since 2003, this climate observation, precipitation. We saw the extreme events happening in these 3 years, the hot and dry year, and the hot year, 3 events happening consecutive years. So this was our area. But in this, because of these consecutive events, this is carbon uptake by the forest, like a white pine, conifer forest, different ages of the forest. We saw a decline in net carbon uptake in all 3 stands because of this back-to-back events that was happening. All ages show the same decline, and the youngest site was even carbon source. The main site was just at the margin. So this, at some point I thought, is my data or something went wrong? But then 2019, we were back there. So if these consecutive events happen, this will have impact on the ecosystem, health impacts, and all other systems that we may have in our region. So this is my last slide. So this was on July 10. The news, you saw this news, extreme heat cooked the shellfish alive in Canada, in BC, in Vancouver area. So they were basically cooked alive because temperature hit 125 degree there. So Fahrenheit, this is like a US report, so Fahrenheit. But at the same time, we saw the next side-by-side news was this Richard Branson's spaceship kind of news that was flying the next day. So we can ask why the whole planet is being toasted. The humanity is striving for the space, while we have to solve this basic energy management problem to save our systems, and it needs some serious thought, it needs some serious investment, and it needs some serious technological advancements. So that's my last slide, and that's my message there. So thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arain. So up next, we're going to hear from Jane Murrell. Jane is the supervisor of health hazards and vector-borne disease, the health hazards and vector-borne disease program with the Health and Safe Communities Public Health Services and Healthy Environments of the City of Hamilton. Now, Jane is unable to stay, so if you have any questions for Jane, drop them in the chat box, and we will get to them right after Jane's talk. Jane, how you doing?
Good, how are you? Thanks, Matt. So I was asked tonight to just speak a little bit about public health and our heat warnings and kind of how the process works. So we monitor temperature through two different sources. One is through Environment Canada and one is through a third-party contractor that has monitoring devices downtown, as well as one at the airport. So we continue to watch that. When we see temperatures are rising, we get prepared. In order to call the heat warning, we need to have 2 consecutive days where the temperature is 31 degrees Celsius or higher, or 2 consecutive days where the humidex is 40 degrees or higher. So Environment Canada will send us an early warning notification when it's time to issue the heat warning. And then once we get that wording, we make the announcement to our community partners and media outlets to prepare the community. So with that, we also, in the media release, as well as on our website, provide information on how to keep cool, some basic health effects, where we have designated cooling locations through the city. So we have various libraries and community and rec centers. As well as all of the pools and splash pads that the city operates, which during heat warnings, admission to city pools is free. And then if the event is going to last more than 2 days, we do an extended heat warning. And then once the temperatures drop, then we will do the cancellation. So that's kind of the process. Not sure if there would be any questions about that.
Not any questions I can see in the chat. No. Tom, do you see anything?
No, I don't see any questions on the city's heat warning triggers. There is a question for Dr. Arain that we could all either pose now or later.
Yeah, why don't we have that question maybe for Dr. Arain right now while we're it's all fresh on our minds.
Yeah. Okay, so, great. So can you see it, Dr. Arain?
Yes. I saw the question. The question is explain the slide regarding the trees at the Turkey Point. I wasn't certain why the trees weren't clearing the carbon as well as usual. Okay, so there are 2 things happens. Because when you have an extreme event, the photosynthetic uptake capacity has some impact. So there was some decline in photosynthetic capacity because of the higher temperature. It's well established, very high heat will affect the apparatus and the stomatas will close and the carbon would not go in and the water will not come. So that's one impact. But most importantly, the respiration rate increased. So if you count the decline in photosynthesis and increase in the respiration, decomposition of the organic matter that is in the ground, then what we worry is the net carbon. How much came by the photosynthesis and how much is the loss through the system. So what is our net at the ground or in the trees and whole ecosystems? So that is what was happening. Our net was less, declining over the year.
Great.
Okay.
No.
I think there is one for Jane as well. So thank you, Dr. Arain, for that explanation. The question John is asking, is there any consideration to anticipate heat days so that those in jeopardy can take cover on the first day rather than wait for people to die? Jane, just wondering if there's been any consideration given if if it looks like it's going to be an extended period of extreme heat, do plans change? If Hamilton, for example, looks like we're going to experience something that the West Coast experienced, do plans change for the city's heat warning system?
So for extended heat warnings, we once we find out on the second day that the temperatures are going to remain in place, that threshold, then we would call an extended heat warning on the third day. So we wait for the second day to get verification. Unfortunately, you know, I'm not a meteorologist, but weather is certainly not predictable. There are many times where I'm getting ready, you know, for the weekend and preparing staff that are working over the weekend to, you know, because it looks like we might have a, you know, meet the threshold and have a heat warning. And so we get everything prepared in the template and we warn our community partners at our rec centers and libraries that have cooling locations. And then sure enough, the heat warning doesn't take place. And then other instances, like a couple of weekends ago, literally at 2:30, Environment Canada tells us in the next hour, they're going to issue an official heat warning for the Hamilton area. So we have 1 hour to get the template ready. And then as soon as they give us that warning, an hour later, out the warning goes. So we don't get enough notice. And we certainly don't issue heat warnings days in advance before the day actually occurs because weather does change so much. Yeah, I mean, yes, Julia, I'm looking at your question right now. Obviously, you know, our downtown core where we have, you know, more high rises and more concrete, we do get, you know, those higher temperatures than say out at the airport monitoring site where there's a lot of, you know, open air and more green space. But there's not a huge variance between the two monitors, at least through the contractor that we're using right now. So I hope that answered.
Great, thanks, thanks, Jane.
There's another one there.
There's a couple of others that have popped up as well. One from Ruth. What are the indications that a person is suffering from the heat, and can the humidity, even in an air-conditioned location, still be high enough to cause health problems? So if you feel comfortable answering that, terrific. We're also going to have Dr. Dale Gunter on a little bit later, talk about some of the health impacts of
yes, I'll leave the health impacts for the medical professionals. And as for humidity in an air-conditioned location, it would, I guess, obviously, if there's that much humidity, the temperature is not set correct. I would not consider properly air-conditioned. So there should not be a high humidity in an air-conditioned space.
And the one comment I would make is this: the most death that we see in some areas is the sweating, where you lose the fluid and the mass. So that's the most important indicator. Like you have to be hydrated. In the urban areas, in the apartment complexes, in the buildings where you don't have the air conditioning, even though you are inside, you are in the shade, but your body may constantly be losing water. So we have seen death in the women in certain areas. In third world countries, they were home at the other time in the building, but they were more affected. So that's the most important thing to watch. There are other implications the doctors may talk, but this is number one. One question is for me, like a high pressure cycle kind of, maybe I can explain. If you have a very large contrast in the north and the south in the temperature, we have the jet stream, they have a certain path, they follow this certain path. So when this contrast between the north temperature and the southern latitude temperature is decreasing, then it has an impact on the path and the movement of the jet streams. So that will impact the high pressure areas and the low pressure areas. So that's why we have seen it in the winter, very strong things staying for a longer. So that's the reason. It has to relate with sea temperature, extent of the sea ice. So it's and how they are impacting those phenomena. So thanks a lot.
Great. So thank you for all the questions that have been posed. Maybe I'll turn it back to Linda and Matt now to continue with the presentations.
Thanks so much, Tom, and thank you to Dr. Rain and to Jane Morrell for helping to set the context. And maybe before we shift on to our next group of speakers, I just want to, I feel like I need to say to people that the news looks pretty dire. And tonight we are focusing on the challenges, but I want us to stay hopeful, because session 2 is really going to focus on solutions and what we can all do. So I feel like I need to say that right now after hearing the details of the trends that we're seeing. It's a lot to take in, but I think if anything, it just underscores how important it is that we're all having these kinds of conversations and really trying to figure out where we need to go. So we're now going to hear from an amazing group of different individuals who are going to share perspectives on this issue. And I'm going to start by introducing the first one. Really pleased to introduce to all of you Laurie Peterson, and Laurie is with BC Acorn, so British Columbia, and she's going to share with us tonight the recent experience they've had out there with the BC heat wave. Laurie, welcome.
Thank you, Linda. Can everybody hear me? Good, excellent. Thank you very much for that nice introduction. I'm speaking to you from the unceded, which means non-treaty regions of the Musqueam, the Snoqualmie, where I was born, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations, Indigenous nations. My name is Laurie Peterson. I live now in the metro region of Vancouver in a community called Burnaby, BC, on the border with New Westminster, BC. So some of the temperatures that I may be talking about are based on temperatures from New Westminster, which the region of Burnaby I live in most resembles, rather than the city of Burnaby, where the temperature is taken in the north of our city, where it's highly forested. So we are in the open area, more open area on a fairly large hill. I guess that would be called a mountain in Ontario, but it's just a hill here. Over the Fraser River, which is one of our major rivers in British Columbia. So that gives you a little bit of an idea. We experienced a heat dome from about June 28th to July 2nd or 3rd. We had almost no humidity, but in this region and throughout BC, there was a lot of alpine flooding from alpine snow cap melting and then flooding communities in this area of BC. So people were doing two things. They were trying to find shelter from heat, and also they were trying to conserve water. We in BC have never, ever had a heat wave in the month of June. This is totally unprecedented. Our heat waves generally fall into the late August period when most of the snow on the mountains has melted, and that then contributes to dry conditions in the forest areas. We have over 300 fires burning in British Columbia today. We're in a very dire position because 300 fires is almost too much to handle. The provincial government is about to call in some military help to help with those forest fires. One of our tiny communities quite close to the coast of BC completely burned to the ground in a matter of a few hours. It was considered the hottest hottest place in British Columbia, and it's a small town called Lytton. But once again, temperatures would not ever be this high in June in Lytton. So the whole town was completely burned to the ground. It only had about 300, like between 100 and 300 people living there, but it's a major transportation corridor in BC. Just to go on from there, to say that I live in a building that is managed by BC Housing, which is a Crown corporation of BC. It was designed for disabled people and seniors who are ill. I live in a wheelchair suite myself. And during the heat wave, we had no communication to any of us in the building. The only communication we got was from watching television or reading about it on the internet. No one contacted me at my door. No communication came in writing underneath my door. And we were really suffering with terrible temperatures inside the apartment building. As Dr. Rain has said, these are the most vulnerable places, housing the most vulnerable people. In my apartment, the temperature ranged from 33 degrees to 39 degrees inside. Outside, our temperatures reached 43. One evening, I was out trying to find a very cool place by the river and have a drink to quench my thirst. And the temperature was 39 degrees at 6 p.m. in the evening with a hot breeze, which we've never had either in the communities around us. So that's sort of just a little background. We had a death in our building. Someone who was quite fragile medically died. When I asked our administrators why that happened, the answer I got was completely unacceptable. They said, well, if he doesn't reach out, how do we know he's suffering? This is a sign of ignorance at the highest level. The man was nonverbal for one thing, and highly disabled. Our premier has said that there are going to be immediate changes to plans on identifying vulnerable people in the more urban parts of British Columbia. But nothing much has happened yet. Here in this building, I asked BC Housing what supportive housing actually means. What do they mean when they say supportive housing? Because I would imagine response to extreme weather conditions is something supportive housing should do better for people. There's no air conditioning. 30% of British Columbians have air conditioning, 30. Slightly higher in our wine producing and fruit producing regions. There it's about 50%, but none of it is appropriate for the temperatures we have had. Rapid transit, there is no air conditioning on most of our rapid transit systems. Many of the buses have no air conditioning as well. So it was a very vulnerable situation for all of us to be in. That's probably, I personally suffered a lot. I was dehydrated, I was trying to hydrate, but when you're constantly sweating all day, and then of course the temperatures did not go down at night, which again is something that never happens in British Columbia, ever. When you're experiencing 5 days of heat with no night respite from the high temperatures, and you're disabled, you will probably die at some point without some interventions from the supportive housing architecture. What else can I say? That's probably a kind of what I mostly meant to say. Does anybody want to comment, or shall we wait?
I don't know if there are any questions now, or if we want to continue listening to other speakers. Lori, thank you so much for sharing your story, your lived experience going through what you had to go through in your community. Just really,
Thank you.
yeah, we appreciate your willingness to do that, and just terrifying what you went through.
Yes, and actually also what I learned is that apparently this heat dome was caused by, in some part, flooding in China. Then there was mudslides in Japan, and somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. I'm sure Dr. Rain knows more about this than I. A heat dome developed on the western coast of North America, not just in BC, but in all the American states below us.
Well, Lori, thank you so much. And you're going to be able to stick around for some questions when we get to questions a bit later.
Yep.
But thank you.
Yes.
Up next, we're going to hear from Stu Klazinga. Stu is a local advocate who lives in East Hamilton. Stu, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Hi, thanks for having me. So Tom initially asked if I would be willing to talk about my experiences here with heat. I've actually advocated on the subject a few times, sort of annually, I guess. Just like snow removal, it comes up every year. I've actually even sat down with counselors in City Hall talking about, like with there was someone from bylaw, someone from property standards, someone from public health, and we were talking about, how we can change things. That was already a couple years ago, and I haven't seen any progress made. But when it comes to older high-rise buildings, which I'd say most of the apartment buildings in Hamilton would qualify as older, there's a couple downtown that are newer, but all the ones scattered across the rest of the city, I think they're all built around the same time. They weren't built to accommodate this kind of heat. And so there's very rarely a breeze because your apartment faces one direction. So it's very difficult to get air to travel through, even if you open up all the windows, because it's not pushing through. It's just hitting the side of the building outside. So that's one issue. The other issue is there's no air conditioning built into the building. The buildings don't typically have systems that can be adapted to use air conditioning. They have radiator heating, baseboard heating, whatever. You can't just push ice water through those and cool the building down, unfortunately, as lovely as that would be. And a lot of these buildings house more of Hamilton's vulnerable populations, people who live at or below the poverty line, seniors, people with disabilities. And those people are going to be the ones who are most susceptible to suffering from the heat. So when we first moved here 5 years ago or so, we had a big window unit, sat in the window shaker, we used to call it. And that was fine. That kept the living room nice and cool. And then they replaced the windows in the entire building. And now the windows are, they're about this big, whereas before they were probably a good few inches wider and they went 4 feet up, like the whole window slid open. So now you can get even less airflow through your unit, but it also means you can't fit most of the window air conditioners. So you have to go to other less efficient options. And so there's a few reasons why the windows are the way they are, safety standards being one of them. Are there ways to design windows that would fit a larger air conditioner or allow for more airflow that would still meet the safety standards? Yes. Would those windows be more expensive? Yes. Are landlords going to be convinced to put them in? Probably not on their own. So we need to design just better windows. And if landlords had a requirement to keep residences below a certain temperature, similar to how they are required to keep residences above a certain temperature in the winter, that would get rid of a lot of these problems. So our specific problems are window sizes. So we can't fit a window unit, which means we have to use portable units, which use more, they're less energy efficient. So a 14,000 BTU window unit would easily keep my living room at about 24 degrees, even on the hottest days, like we're talking high 30s outside, it would still be 24 inside, which is beautiful. 24 is great. But a 14,000 BTU portable air conditioner, we're lucky if we stay, 27, 28 when it's high 30s. So 14,000 BTU air conditioner should be the same, but the problem is that with a window unit, the condenser coil and the evaporator coil are on opposite sides of the wall, which helps. A central air system does it the best because the evaporator coil and the condenser coil aren't even beside each other. They're separated by, space and a giant wall. And the only thing connecting them is just a little tube for the coolant to go through, because that's all that's needed for a heat pump, which is what an air conditioner is you just need to be able to get coolant from one condenser coil to an evaporator coil and back, and that's it. So our other issues are the fuse box. The fuse box, we can only, if we turn on the microwave while we have our air conditioner going, the breaker trips. So that's one thing that we have to watch out for. We have 3 air conditioners presently, one small one for the room I'm presently in, which is my wife's office, one for the living room, one for the bedroom. When we do put the one in this room, we can't also use the one in the bedroom because it's too much for the fuse box to handle. All of these units have been newly renovated. Could they have, put in higher fuses and upgraded the electrical system? Absolutely, they could. Did they want to? No. Why? Because they have no incentive to do so. My being able to use better appliances doesn't really affect them because I'm already living here. And older buildings are often going to have older fuse boxes. They're not going to be able to run as heavy duty appliances as new as new wiring might allow. So yeah, there's lack of airflow. Oh, right. So 2-piece units, like a central air system where you've got the big fan outside, it just goes to the furnace. You can get smaller separated systems that would work in apartment buildings. If you've ever gone to a hotel and you look up at the top, or some churches have put them in too because the building's old and it's the best that they can do. You look up at the top and there's a white box along the top of the ceiling, and that's the air conditioner. And yes, and what that is that's just one half of the device. The other half is located on the opposite side of the wall, usually a large box with a fan. If every unit in my apartment building had just one of those in the living room, The living room would be able to be kept very cool. We all pay for our own hydro, so they could easily just tack it onto our meters. But then at least we'd have the ability to keep the unit cool, which without those, it's tough.
Hey, so Stu, just trying to be mindful of the fact that we have like an incredible lineup of folks today.
Right. Did I hit 5 minutes?
It's amazing everything that you're saying, but we're definitely over 5.
Okay.
But I think that just means we need to keep the conversation going, but we definitely hear from some other folks.
Yep.
So yeah, if you can kind of give us a good key message to wrap, and I think we should definitely keep chatting in the future.
Maximum heat legislation from municipalities and provinces. That's what we need. With the landlords need to be made to care.
Amazing. Thank you, Stu.
So thank you.
Thanks so much, Stu. So next we've got Colleen Lacey, and Colleen is with Acorn Hamilton. She's a tenant living without air conditioning in her unit. She's at Pier Towers in Ward 2. Welcome, Colleen.
Hi. Yeah, we live at the Pierce Towers down in the North End, and we've been here since 2011. And CLB Group bought out from Homestead in October 2020. And as we're grandfathered in here, because we've been here, hydro's included in our rent. Now, all the new renovations, every time someone moves out, a hydro box is put in to that apartment, along with dishwashers and washers and dryers, and they're all installed in the new renos. But for mine sense, I would say in most, because there's 2 towers here, they're low to moderate income tenants. I think probably there is a little bit more of higher income that's moved in here because of the renovations. Because I know from what we are in here now, the rent has gone up probably, I'd say, because probably about $800-900, $1,000 at least for what we pay has gone up from the same space. Now, when we first moved in, we brought air conditioning with us, put it in our window, because my husband and I are both seniors. And luckily, our next door neighbors were the managers from both towers. So when I asked about the cost about the air conditioning, we were told we didn't have to worry about it. And I think that's mainly because we were seniors. So and then I'd say we had it for about 2 years, air conditioning, and new management came in, and we were told to either start paying for it or take it out. So with us where we are here, we are facing the harbor. So we get, in the mornings, we get terrible, terrible, terrible heat. And then in the afternoon, we start to get a little bit of breeze. So we're kind of lucky about that. So, but we both have COPD, and my husband's on oxygen. And they used to charge $40 a month or $140 for the season for our air conditioning. Now, since the new owners have taken over, it's gone up to $68.75 a month or $380 from May till September. So it's pretty well. And in the end, anyways, we cannot afford to pay that because we're both on a fixed income. And our solution is just we have 3 or 4 fans, and that's what we do. And when it gets really, really bad, we just do not move, especially my husband. We don't move, just have the fans on. But with 3 or 4 fans, what is the difference between putting an air conditioning in and running 3 or 4 fans on the hydro? But I'm was just listening to Stuart, and the same things have been done here. Our fuses were changed and everything, and nothing can run. We probably couldn't run an air conditioner on our fuses now, along with everything else. They've done that with the renovations. So, but that's I just don't, thank heavens that we have each other to be with. And when it's like to look after each other, it's like there's people by themselves. That's especially low-income seniors and the people with disabilities. They need to be taken care of and they don't need to be looked upon when the weather gets so hot like this. And in fact, I just got a call this morning. We have a friend that lived in Waterdown, and he was taken into the hospital 3 weeks ago with heat stroke. He's in his 80s, but still. And I just got a call this morning that he's passed. So it's just, we're lucky that we have what we have here. Although air conditioning for us would be marvelous, but there's no way we can afford $70 extra a month. No way. So I don't know what the solution is or anything. So anyways, that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. Up next, I'd like to introduce Sarah Jama. Sarah is the co-founder and executive director of the Disability Justice Network of Ontario.
Hi, everyone. I think a lot of people brought up some great points, so I'm going to keep this relatively short. Disability justice means nobody gets left behind. It means we're not just centering adding ramps to stores. We're centering the politics of who gets left behind in our society. And we've seen over the course of the increasing impact of climate change, on top of the impacts of this pandemic, that it is disabled people that got left behind. I'm thinking about our friends in the States, the Disability Justice Culture Club that was founded by a friend of mine, Stacey Milburn. She was a disabled person who, in her last moments on Earth, was fighting against government in Oakland because they implemented, in the midst of climate crisis, in the midst of fires over there and people having a difficult time breathing, they implemented a recall of people's extra oxygen tanks, saying that if you have oxygen tanks that you don't need, you need to return that. And then also said that if you are disabled and you have health care concerns, you have the ability to be put down on the list of who will receive care in that context because of your disability. So in the middle of a climate crisis and in the middle of the pandemic, it was disabled people that were being denied care. And she proclaimed in her last moments through YouTube that this was going to get worse and this was going to continue. That rather than government prioritize the most vulnerable in times of crisis, the most vulnerable will be left behind. And we're seeing that in BC right now, where people are struggling to make rent. Affordability is at an all-time low, and disabled people are being pushed out of communities. On top of that, the government recently put out statements that said that it was on the individual to prepare for the impacts of the climate crisis and the heat wave. It was on the individual to prepare for buying ACs. It was on the individual to prepare for buying prescriptions. Who is able to do that? It's not people who are poor. I need to stop talking. Sorry. My nephew's playing video games. It's not people who is poor that get left behind. I mean, who can afford it. It's people who are poor. People who need prescriptions often can't get prescriptions months in advance, but the premier had said it's on you to prepare. And so what happened is disabled people predominantly died from heat stroke and in this heat crisis. About 700 people died in BC, and a lot of those people couldn't afford to live otherwise. And so we're seeing this over and over and over again, where disabled people get left behind in times of crisis. Not just healthcare, but also in climate crisis. And our movements are not built to fit these people. And we see that even in policy asks. we're talking about right now deinstitutionalizing disabled people from institutions. And the reason this conversation is happening is because government in BC is using the argument of the heat crisis and what happened to disabled people who died in the heat to say that this is why long-term care should exist. Like, these arguments are being made by politicians, when we already know that long-term care is killing disabled people because of the pandemic, but also because it's not fully invested in, because doctors or nurses, aren't being invested in, because there's not enough care and investment in care. And so people are being impacted by all sorts of crises, and that will constantly impact disabled people. And I think I really wanted to say that. What does that look like locally here? Where, well, I think that's already been touched on. Disabled people who already don't have places to live that are accessible, who already struggle in apartments that are labeled as accessible to use proper accessible showers, because there are barely any in Hamilton. There are only 2 accessible shelters in Hamilton. Disabled people already struggle to find common ground in terms of where to live. When you add affordability to the mix on top of crisis around heat and security, I'm really, really worried about those who are the most vulnerable, who can't, afford the peace that comes with being able to live, right? Disability becomes a huge disadvantage. And I think the way forward is for people in positions of power, but also for our movements to really understand what exists for disabled people in terms of rights and what doesn't. The Ontario Building Code doesn't say anything about fire exits in accessible units. So you're often told to congregate on your floor and wait for help. And there are lots of issues like that as well. As I already mentioned, a lot of bathrooms are not fully accessible, especially showers, because that's an expensive investment. And AOTA doesn't specifically state that, the specific regulations around housing. There's no housing regulation in AOTA itself, although that's being pushed for by activists. So all you really have to go on is the Ontario Building Code, which stipulates the building itself, but not actual units. So oftentimes, although there are some parameters around accessibility, it's not enough. And when you talk about people who are impacted by heat, it's often elderly people who are already disabled. And so I think this is mostly what I wanted to say. I'm a fast talker and I apologize. The answer is not on people with disabilities or disabled people to provide solutions. The answer is for people in positions of power who are policymakers to really understand how it is and why we've come to a situation where disabled people are left behind in almost every single policy conversation. But our movements too, when we talk about environmental justice, needs to center disability justice as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing all of those important issues. We've got lots we've got to work on here to get moving in the direction that we need to be moving in. So we appreciate you sharing your perspectives. I want to invite Janina Lebon now to speak, and Janina is with the Hamilton Health Coalition, and she's going to talk about extreme heat and its impacts on housing for seniors in long-term care facilities. Janina, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Heat is only one of the problems in long-term care, and I'll try to stay on topic. Last year, in the midst of COVID, heat was a big problem in the long-term care homes. However, the families could not get in to see what the problem was. Enough pressure was put on the government, and a couple of press releases came out and said, air conditioning is going to be mandatory. Well, fast forward to this year. The regulations were only promulgated recently. So how can you have air conditioners when you cannot have the regulations in place? I'm sorry. And worse than that, in the new buildings, there is still no requirement for air conditioning in the new designs. I'm sorry. And it's a bit contradictory because you don't have to have air conditioner, but you have to keep the temperature at 22 degrees. Dehydration is a major problem. And so the Ontario Health Coalition listened and read the last press release, and all homes have air conditioner. Well, they don't. Some only have it in the common areas. Some have it as well in the residence bedrooms. So the coalition decided to do a survey, and we're in the midst of it. Out of the 656 homes, we got comments from people on 167. Half of them are fully air conditioned. The others aren't. Common areas, as I indicated, but also the offices for management, all air conditioned. A little story I heard this morning was, oh yeah, my admin was complaining how cold it is and wearing a sweater, and the rest of us are roasting. So for me to you is, if you know of homes in Hamilton, only 3 replied to the survey. If you know they have air conditioner or don't, I'd appreciate knowing. My email is simple, my first initial, my last name, @simpatico.ca, because we know it's a problem. If you don't have air conditioning, the body doesn't get cooled, you get overheated, and it's just another cause for death in the long-term care homes. There was a very good article in the Globe and Mail on this particular topic by Karen Howlett. And opening line, despite Ford's pledge, the new Ontario long-term care homes are not required to install air conditioners. So if you know your MPP, send them an email or phone them. And I'll leave it at that, sorry.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Just maybe for the email, if we could drop that into the chat, if that might be useful for folks too.
I will try, but I am one of these techie challenged people.
All good. It is all good. And maybe if people need that email address, we can just repeat it again later as well. So up next, I would like to invite Kojo Dempsey. Kojo is the Executive Director of the Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion.
Yes, hello, good evening, everyone. Yes, the heat is definitely on, and the heat has been on for a long period of time. Matt started off with a land acknowledgement, and I would also like to start from that point of view. You know, this country was founded on white supremacy, racism, and also the exclusion, murder, colonial violence of indigenous peoples, nations, and communities. Why do I mention that? Because I think as treaty people, we have been irresponsible of how we take care of our environment. And so this predicament that we are in is because of that lack of responsibility to be stewards of the environment. In terms of indigenous rights, with respect to climate justice, we have to talk about the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline. We have to talk about mining in Ajax. We have to talk about nuclear waste in a number of indigenous communities. And then here in Hamilton, we also have to talk about Coots Paradise, where we had water protectors tell us that something was wrong with the water. And now it's going to cost upwards of 170 million to clean Coots Paradise. And just to give a comparison to that number, the Hamilton Police Department has a budget of 176. So I just want you to see how dire and how irresponsible we have been in terms of taking care of the environment. Now, when we talk about the heat is on, many stories have been mentioned here about how this is a public health crisis, and we have not done a good job of learning from this current pandemic. You know, most of you remember we had 3 apartment buildings that had outbreaks, and our chief medical officer couldn't even give a full reason and spectrum of how people would be vaccinated. So when my colleague Sarah talks about leaving people behind, imagine if we had a flood advisory for the whole of Hamilton. Imagine if we had a heat advisory for the whole of Hamilton. We saw what went down in Texas with their ice storm, where even running water was a challenge. So imagine if we had that here. Imagine if we had a fire pandemic and any other health crisis or climate crisis here in Hamilton. Do we have a plan for apartment buildings? Do we have an evacuation plan that we as residents would know what to do? And I would estimate the answer is no, because even in this pandemic, our municipal, provincial, and federal government haven't even given us plans of how we get out of this pandemic. So when we say the heat is on, it is a literal meaning the heat is on. And we as community groups need to also come up with our own solutions of how to get through this. So I think this discussion around the heat is on is going to provide solutions. And so those solutions are definitely going to be important, because I can tell you that I do not have any confidence in our municipality and our province and the federal government to get us through a climate crisis, which invariably is connected to a public health crisis. So we definitely need those solutions. And the last thing I will say, because I know we're running out of time, is, you know, the Just Recovery Coalition kind of set the stage for how different organizations can work together. And we're seeing the fruits of that, where you have Environment Hamilton, ACON, and the Roundtable for Poverty Reduction come together to kind of get us talking about these things. So we need to continue with that solidarity. We need to center Indigenous voices and rights, and we need to make sure that we're working together, because at the end of the day, when these crises hit, we know that municipal governments, provincial governments will do their kind of juggling, but at the end of the day, we are the ones that are left to take care of the community. And I'll end with this quote so that we understand what we need to do. Governments are always good at managing problems, but not solving problems. And it's up to us to come up with those solutions so that we can address this climate crisis and this public health crisis. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Kojo. Indeed, we hear what you're saying, and we do have to come together and empower each other to get to where we need to go on these issues. I want to next invite Dr. Dale Gunter to speak, and Dr. Gunter is with the Shelter Health Network, and he's going to talk to us about extreme heat and the houseless. Dr. Gunter.
Okay, thanks Linda, and thank you Tom, and thanks Matt for the invitation, the opportunity to be with you. This was a really great challenge to be asked about this topic, which I do not spend a whole lot of time thinking about except on really hot days when I can't stand being outside. So I'm going to take you on a very brief journey down biology lane and focus really entirely on what the effect of this is on people who live outside or in homeless shelters. So the biology lane part is this: our bodies really, really want to be one temperature, 37 degrees Celsius, 98.6 Fahrenheit, and to get not far from that at all in either direction, or things start to go screwy. And so we've heard our speakers talk about different ways that happens. Really, there are two main mechanisms, and I'll tell you about these just because it's important in understanding what it's like to be outside or in shelters. One is that our bodies move blood from the inside over to the outside. That is from things like the organs, the liver, the kidneys, the bowel, and it moves it out to the surface, to the skin areas where where blood can cool. And it moves blood back in order to warm it up. So we have blood flow change from being mainly over to the skin to cool, and then mainly inside to warm it up. So that's one thing. And the other thing that our body has at its disposal is to sweat. When it puts water out on the surface and it evaporates, it causes us to cool. What happens with extreme heat, and especially with humidity, is that even once the body has pumped as much as possible out to the surface and has pumped out as much sweat as it possibly can, it sometimes still cannot keep up. And it's when it can't keep up that we really run into trouble, because the temperature goes from 37 to 38 to 39 to 40. And if it hits 40 or goes over 40, that's where we start to run into really big trouble. That would be called the most severe stage, or heat stroke. And with that, we start to hallucinate. We certainly start to have a lot of brain fog. We can have seizures. We can have heart malfunction, so usually rhythm problems, and that's the severe end stage of overheating. Lots of other pieces before that of just discomfort and not being able to think and not being able to sleep and so on. So that ends biology lane. Now let's go over to being somebody who lives outside in an encampment. Somebody who lives outside in an encampment almost always, not always, has something else going on from a mental health or addiction point of view. And in that situation, we end up with a bit of a vicious cycle. So having an issue around mental health or addiction that changes the way we perceive the outside world, that changes the way we perceive what's going on with our body, will make it harder for us to do the things that would routinely happen to protect ourselves, like go in the shade, or like stand with our arms out instead of standing like this and staying hot. So some of the most simple automatic reflexes that we would have to keep ourselves cooling aren't functioning well if we have either problems with our thinking or problems with caused by our own selves or caused by other substances that we've been taking. So then we start to do things that don't help us to cool and may even make us hotter. The other thing that happens is a lot of the medications or street substances or alcohol that may be in the system change that biological regulation that I just told you about. So it changes our ability to shift blood to the surface. It doesn't shift to the surface properly to cool, and it doesn't go, and we don't sweat properly either. Some substances are much more at risk of doing that than others. And so with large heat exposure events, we know that people with mental health conditions and addiction troubles are the ones who are most likely to have severe threats to their lives from this. So that same scenario holds for many people living in shelters, and all the things that you've heard from the speakers about what makes buildings a problem pertains to many of our shelter situations in Hamilton as well. So I think I will leave that there, and thanks very much again for the opportunity to be here and learn a lot from people who have been thinking about this for a long time.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Matt, you go.
Linda, I knew we would do this when we're co-hosting. Thank you so much, Dr. Gunter. So we are coming up on 8 o'clock, but I know that we have questions. And so we have questions for our panelists. I know Tom has kind of been collecting them. And I'm wondering, with Tom's assistance, if we want to go about 10 minutes extra for some of those questions, especially folks who've been hanging on to those questions.
Okay, Matt and Linda, I don't know if there's any specific questions for any of the speakers. There's a number of comments you'll be able to see in the chat, but you may want to open up the floor for a few minutes in case anything's come up over the last few speakers that people have questions about.
There was one medical question earlier that was deferred to Dr. Gunter.
That's true. Yeah, and that question, what are the indications that a person is suffering from the heat, and can the humidity, even in an air-conditioned location, still be high enough to cause health problems? And I think that's a great question, and that was from Ruth. I don't think Ruth is with us any longer. I think she had to jump off, but certainly a great question. And given what Lori said earlier about the fact that the temperatures on the West Coast were really high, but they didn't experience the same type of humidity that we do here in Southern Ontario on really hot days. Is there concern, specific concerns about those humid conditions, Dale? Dr. Gunter.
Yeah, the humidity makes it harder for us to cool because we don't evaporate. Our sweat doesn't evaporate in the same way, and so our temperatures can rise more. We also, interestingly, like desert situations and high heat are more likely to dehydrate us and cause us to succumb to all the symptoms of dizziness, the fainting, the collapse of dehydration. So dry has another effect, but it is easier to overheat in the humid conditions and easier to dehydrate in the dry ones. So. And I guess the things that we would notice, I didn't talk anything about the respiratory problems, but certainly heat affects people with chronic lung disease and creates a constriction of air passages and things like that. And humidity can be more bothersome with that as well.
Thank you very much. Linda and Matt, we also have a comment from Andrea McDowell. If there's time, she'd like to just mention the adaptation project. So maybe we could either now or a little bit later. And there's another question, I believe, from Shelley for Dr. Dale. What is the role of family physicians for identifying frail elders and or disabled patients of theirs to take action? I'm assuming during periods of extreme heat, check in on them and help resolve some of those heat issues. Is there anything currently in the community like a vulnerable persons registry, for instance?
So Shelley, I might put that back towards you. I'm wondering if maybe you have actually thought about that in some detail, and if so, I'd be thrilled if you wanted to answer that question that you asked. Otherwise, I'll bumble my way through it. But what do you think, Shelley? Was that too much of putting you on the spot?
No, that's fine. I'm a retired family physician and an Edmontonian.
Yeah.
And Edmonton, I really enjoyed the comments from the woman from Vancouver, because I was speaking to my aunt in Edmonton today, and asked me if I had air conditioning. I went, you can't survive here without air conditioning, and how the prairies and certainly the West Coast are just not prepared for the kind of temperatures that I've become used to in Hamilton. So I had a patient who lived in, I think it was city housing, high rise. It's actually a really nice, roomy apartment, but there was no AC, and she wasn't handy. I wasn't handy. The kind of air conditioners you could put in, because I actually went to look for her, because I thought, well, how expensive can an air conditioner be? Well, the ones that you kind of plug in and there's still a tube to the outside. I mean, there was no way I was going to install anything. And we just ground to a halt in trying to solve her. And she was a very large woman, lung disease, heart disease, you name it, tremendous, terrible swelling in her legs. And I just, whenever it got hot, I would think about how was she coping in that place. So when COVID first started, I was retired by then and trying to think of, the CNN and CBC kept saying, think of frail people in the community and check in with them. And how do you have a registry other than the kind of alternative to computers, which is my memory and thinking of somebody who might need something. So I don't know if that's too long-winded, but that particular patient really troubled me, because clearly it was an old building. I think thankfully the windows were old enough that you could have put in a window unit, but who's going to do that? And there was one internist who did for my patient with lung cancer, and he went over actually on his own time in the weekend and installed an air conditioner.
Wow.
Keep him alive, Clive. Put in an air
That would be the
conditioner.
one, yeah.
And that's also very much against the rules as far as physicians and boundaries and not getting too caught up in your, trying to maintain some distance from your patients. But I don't know.
I have to say I'm pretty liberal about writing those notes that say, for medical reasons, this person needs an air conditioner in their unit when it can help. But
when it can help, but is that, and that probably is what I want to ask in 2 weeks' time, is this something that should be on ODB?
Right.
That you would have as much right to an air conditioner as you would to digoxin.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense.
Great. Linda and Matt, I see a couple of hands up. Lori and Kojo have hands up, so they may have some comments. And I think Stu's going to has something he wants to mention as well.
Should we start with Lori? Did you want to go first, and then Kojo, and then Stu?
Yes, hi. It's more of a statement that I wanted to make rather than a question, although there's a question in it too. I'm an advisor for two health authorities in Metro Vancouver. And we, about 15 or 20, yeah, it was probably 20 years ago, a report was created by the Ministry of Health. It was called Setting Priorities, the Road Ahead. And it covered a lot of things in healthcare that should be changed, a lot of topics, even down to staffing and where that should increase and how that should be happening. But one of the most interesting parts of the report was the identification by percentages of the healthiness of people in BC. So there was a category for good health. There was a category for people who occasionally had surgery but otherwise were in good health. And there was a category called aging and sort of like fragility. And that number of people in BC is about 12% of patients. I think provincially that every province needs to identify those 12%. And I'm in that percentage. And I think healthcare needs to look very differently in order to assist those vulnerable people. In that list would also be people with addictions, people with incurable life-limiting disease, multiple health conditions, mental health issues combined with physical health issues. That 12% needs actually probably a different healthcare system than what we currently have. So this is something I keep bringing up because I'm on a committee for change improvement, quality care improvement in healthcare. And I think unless we know who that 12% is, we don't know how to deliver healthcare to that 12%. But that's just a comment and maybe a question too.
Great. Thank you so much, Lori. I know we wanted to also connect with Kojo and Stu and Andrea, so maybe we'll hear next from Kojo.
Yes, I'll be brief. I think, you know, if our municipality can have bylaw officers that ticket parking cars, we can definitely have, whether it's care workers or climate workers, going to apartment buildings that we know have issues around heat, air quality, all of those things. So I think that's something too that needs to be looked at. And we have to really start thinking about a caring economy that ensures that the most vulnerable, most marginalized, those that are left behind are taken care of and are not left to, devices of their own. And it's not up to community organizations who are also struggling financially to address these things. So I think that's one of the ways in which, you know, we could reach out and know, you know, where the most marginalized are in the city.
Thank you, Kojo. And up next, we wanted to hear from Stu.
Yes. Apologies for going over before. That's not going to happen again. I was very scatterbrained, but I know exactly what I want to say here. Air conditioners. I said that they're basically heat pumps. That's what they are. There's a lot that you can do a deep dive in on air conditioners and the like. Someone had mentioned, you know, it still has a vent going to the window. And I just want to touch on that. An air conditioner requires either a vent going to a window or for a portion of it to be on the opposite side of whatever room it's trying to cool. That's just the mechanics of it. And a warning to people who might not have as much money to spend as they need. There are a lot of predatory marketing campaigns out there. And you can walk into Walmart and you can see a little box and it costs about $40 and it says, this will cool you down. No installation required, none of that. Looks great. And they do work. You know, it's got nothing going to the window. Those are called evaporative coolers. They're also called swamp coolers or a swamp box or a desert cooler. They do work. They will lower temperature or relative temperature of people. However, their efficiency drops off majorly when it's humid. which is the weather that we experience. So, like, someone in that position is just as good spraying themselves with a spray bottle and having a fan blowing in their face. If you see someone who might not have that money to spend, you know, tell them just save it, put it towards something that will work. A swamp cooler in Ontario is just a bad idea, and don't necessarily believe the marketing hype on all these devices. And that's it. Thanks.
And I believe we were going to hear from Andrea.
Hey everyone. It's good to see so many people I recognize and haven't had a chance to connect with over the past 15 months. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Thanks again for inviting me to this. It's been really great to listen in. I just wanted to let you all know that the city is working on a climate adaptation project right now, and we know extreme heat is a big concern for the residents of the city. So this is one of the ones that is on our list. It is active on Engage. It may not be on the front page, but if you look for it, you can find it. A number of you have received emails from me on this over the last couple of weeks. If you have written back to me while I was on vacation this week, apologies for bugging you again, but I thought I'd take the opportunity to say, please write back and fill in the doodle poll. I really want to make sure that we capture your input and feedback for that project. Thank you so much.
Great. Now, I just wanted to check in with Tom and Linda. How are we doing for time?
Yeah, we're at almost 8:15, Matt.
Okay.
So probably, I know you and I have a couple of things that we want to share with people before we wrap up for tonight. So if people are good with that, I think maybe makes sense for us to shift into your closing comments and my closing comments.
Amazing. Well, I just wanted to thank everybody for being here for 2 hours on a beautiful night in July. You know, if you had told me that we would have 35 people talking about this over Zoom, you know, I think that there's a lot of energy here, and I think some good things are going to come from this. And I know, Linda, you're going to talk about what we're doing next. Just in terms of tangible next steps, I just wanted to do a quick pitch. So since 2013, I've been working with a small group of folks, and we have been measuring indoor air temperatures, specifically in apartments and houses, using these little data loggers here. We get them off of Amazon. And what we do is we bring these to people's homes, and all they do is collect temperature. But what we're trying to figure out is how many hours over the course of a given time period is a space above 26 degrees Celsius. So we have lots of data we can talk about. But in terms of making something tangible, if there are any folks who've been here tonight who are interested in hosting one of these data loggers for the next 2 weeks before we meet up again on the 28th, stick around after we wrap, and we can have a conversation. If you, like I said, if you want to host one of these, we can go, okay, this is great. We've been recording temperatures, and this is how many hours over a given day, over a given time period, that the temperature in your house has been above 26, which is a pretty big thing. And it also lets you know what the humidity has been and what the maximum temperature has been. So, like I said, this has just been a project that we've been doing in the community since 2013 after a heat wave. And if you are interested in learning more about these data loggers or being part of a short-term data logging process, I will just stick on the Zoom call after. And so thank you for that. And so I think for closing, I'm going to throw it to Linda.
Thanks, Matt. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I think, you know, I don't need to say it, but I will. You know, you heard from our speakers tonight. This is a huge issue. It's a challenging issue. It's a complicated issue, but it's an urgent one. So our session 2 weeks from now is focused on solutions. And I think the one thing that really struck me tonight is that even by the end of tonight, we were already starting to talk about solutions. And I think that's really great. I think that made me feel good that people's minds were already going there. In the session on the 28th, we've set it up so that we'll have conversations about some more immediate steps that we can take. Sarah Jama's coming back. She's going to be sharing information about Caremongering is one example. We also want to talk about midterm and longer term solutions. So we have a great mix of people coming in to talk about more tangible things. We're going to talk about affordable energy payments, as a way to help people to cope. That's a really important sort of transitioning tool. You'll hear about passive house buildings. And I imagine a lot of you are aware of those already, but in this city, we've got examples of retrofits and new buildings. So paying attention to how are our buildings constructed? How can they be modified to help with keeping people comfortable in extreme heat and extreme cold? You'll hear more about the possibility of a Hamilton Energy retrofit opportunity. And you are going to hear, I know in the chat, somebody was saying, maybe we could be planting more trees. We'll even be talking about things like that. And to me, Kojo referred to this earlier, that, bringing together organizations that have been out there, focused, environment over here, social issues over here, bringing all of us together, I think is a really exciting thing too, because a lot of the solutions to these challenges that we're talking about build the kinds of communities that all of us in our sectors really want to see become reality. So the solutions that are going to bring safer places for people to live, that are going to protect people in the extreme heat and the extreme cold, those approaches are also approaches that are more climate resilient. And ultimately, some of these other elements that we'll be talking about as well, building networks of caring, working with people like Andrea from the city to see where the synergies exist between groups like ours and the city, and how we can all work together and have a greater impact. All of those things come together and I think get us ultimately to where we want to be. So I just wanted to say as well that we're going to be emailing out to all of you a link to the recording of tonight, so that if you want to share it with anyone else or go back and listen again, you'll be able to do that. We're also going to share a link so that you can register for the session on the 28th. And we really hope that you'll join us for that session. And we're really hoping coming out of that session, we'll start to have conversations about how we can all stay in touch and figure out how we can continue ongoing to work on these issues. So I think on behalf of everyone, we want to thank all of the speakers tonight and all of you for being a part of this session, and looking forward to seeing you. Hopefully we can lure you in for another, conversation on a July night, but we promise you it'll be hopefully inspiring and